Music, I've realized that music and dancing and just a lot of things that can bring people together are the quickest and sometimes the most efficient and effective way to bring people together. One of the perfect ones is food, which is why we mentioned mac and cheese and some collard greens. See, I'm getting hungry, and some sweet potato pie. But all of that stuff is really just a bridge meant to unify us, and that's really where our office comes in. My name is Aumaud Arbery. I am the program manager for the Office of Interfaith Dialogue and Engagement here at the University of Pittsburgh, and where we fit in with Pitt Wire Live. Obviously, we are quarantined at this time, though our levels have shifted, and in that time, it's hard for us to be together in person. So Pitt has done a great job of just formulating a platform where students, staff, faculty, community partners, the entire Pitt community can engage with each other and learn different things, grow, not just from the external port, but from the internal side. And that's where we come in, because we cannot forget what's going on inside us. So we've had a myriad of different guests on our show for the past few months, where we've been talking about different interfaith topics. And in April, we specialize on just religious holidays and holy days, where a lot of different faith communities have been practicing. And though they were able to do it in person, we wanted to make sure that people learn not just about the actual holiday and holy day, but about the people who practice it. Just as we've been doing for the past few months, just digging into the different layers of identity. We would be remiss if we weren't sensitive to what's going on in our community, in our country, and around the world, which is why for the past couple of weeks, we've taken a shift, not from focusing on people from a religious aspect, but focusing on people from a human aspect, because this is happening to everybody. We're all experiencing this, not just a pandemic from a virus standpoint, but a pandemic from a racism standpoint. Which is why today, just as last week, we're focusing on justice, injustice, and we have a great group of guests, of friends, of professionals who just dig into this type of work, but in their own respective way. So with that being said, I'm gonna ask y'all, as y'all are typing into the chat individually, to mine, to the guests, we're gonna shift to our actual session. I'm reminding y'all that this is being recorded once again, so you can go to YouTube, Interfaith Pitt, to look at our past episodes. You can go to our website, interfaith.pitt.edu, to see some of the work we have been doing for the past couple years. So we're going to shift. There's a Q&A button at the bottom of your Zoom box. If you have a question, if you have a comment, feel free to put it in there, and we should have time by the end to get to it. It's always a rich conversation that we have on Interfaith Pitt, building new bridges together. And this has been our theme: step into my shoes, the journey of our neighbor, and not simply celebrating religious holidays, but fighting for justice. We obviously have taken a break from our usual rhythm and pattern from our shows, but because of the tragic and unjust deaths of Breonna Taylor, Aumaud Arbery, George Floyd, they're actually Rashad Brooks in Atlanta, who was murdered at a Wendy's. I believe 2 men were hung in Southern California. The names go on and on and on. And these have not only sparked protests around our world for change, but discussions within communities about injustices that occur against marginalized communities and people of color, specifically our Black and African American neighbors. And I've mentioned this before: for us to gain real progress as a society, we need to match the brave feet marching for justice on the outside with courageous conversations, hard conversations about injustice going on the inside. And we can only do that together. If y'all have been to my office, you've seen the quote: if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. And our goal is to go far, so we don't repeat the same patterns we have in history, which is why we have 3 really, really, really dope, wise, honest, and just people who have lived experiences that just don't need to be heard, but need to be spoken. And they're all three friends of mine. So I'll start with my good brother. He's a faculty member within the Religious Studies Department and Jewish Studies, is on our professional Interfaith Advisory Board. You can see him doing different talks around campus, but he's a good friend of mine, Dr. Bahler. How's it going?
Going very well. Thank you so much for having me as part of this.
My pleasure. My pleasure. I already know you stay watching the interfaith session, so it was just a pleasure to have your voice. I talked to you on a personal tip within our board, and it's just been a blessing. So I'm glad to have you here. Where are you calling from?
I'm from home. My dog's right next to me. Hopefully she doesn't bark at some point. And my kids are downstairs playing an online video game with some friends.
It's the best way to keep them busy. I got a bone for you and I got a video game for you. So I appreciate you sectioning off some time for us, man. I know it's busy on your side, but I'm thankful. And I just want to introduce one of my big sisters. I've known her since I was an undergrad, but she's made leaps and bounds for Pitt as an institution, but specifically student affairs. And she is the coordinator for CCLD, cross-cultural and leadership development. She's an advisor. She's the chair for the Diversity and Inclusion Committee within Student Affairs. And she's a mover and shaker in her own right. To my sister, Sherdina Harper. How you doing?
I'm good. And yourself? Thanks for having me.
I'm good on this side. As you can see, she has such a chill demeanor. This conversation, I might start leaning back, grab me a little drink. We was talking about food earlier, so this is really just a conversation with us around this table. Sherdina just has that effect of bringing you in. So as y'all are watching, don't be surprised when you start leaning back, when you start getting more closer to the screen. She has that effect. Where are you calling from, Ms. Harper?
North Side.
Shout out to the North Side. You still up in Pitt?
But by way of the HILL.
Okay. Shout out to the, you gotta throw that in there. Gotta throw that in there. That's how you know where she's really, really from. Well, it's a blessing to have you, and just to bring it to a close. One of my good brothers that I've had the pleasure of meeting within the past year or so, that his name has actually preceded him, and it's kind of like when two sparks meet, you can recognize real. And it's just been a pleasure to get to know him and where he's come from. My brother Jesus Origel, he's a campus minister for student athletes at CCO Campus Ministry. And as I've met a lot of the students that he mentors and he talks to and he pours in, your name precedes you, my brother. So I think it's a pleasure to have you on here. How you doing, man?
I'm well. I'm excited to be a part of this conversation. I have headphones on to keep the noise limited here. My kids are a bit loud and crazy and during the summer, so try to keep it limited here.
I ain't mad at you, man. I appreciate you for just sectioning off this time to really engage with us. I know you got a house full of people. You're constantly moving your feet, but I'm grateful to all three of y'all for really just taking time to talk. And as I mentioned before, this is many times I had the suggestion, why don't you do a panel conversation? And many times panels have good intentions, but it's really a paragon, it's really a spokesperson for an entire group trying to speak over people and not trying to sound stupid and trying to give the right answers. But many times you can't have that. You need rich discussions where you can kind of get in messy places, and you may not have a right answer, but it's not for people to get to know ideas. It's for people to get to know people. And despite all that's going on in the world, we would be remiss if we didn't dig into some of the stuff that's going on. So, Brock, I'll start with you. Just given, because I think it's important for us to actually get to know people that are sharing wisdom and sharing gems with us. I guess if you can tell us, I guess briefly, your social security number. Yeah, I'm just messing with you. If you can share,
let me write that down real quick.
He's gonna start right there. I guess if you can share a little bit of your journey, I know you personally, but a little bit of your journey of how you've come to this point where you are right now, teaching and kind of molding minds within the religious studies department, and how you're, I don't want to say internalizing a lot of stuff that's going on, but seeing as though you're on the Interfaith Board, you've been doing this work for a while. I guess where are you right now internally with stuff that's going on? So I know that's a big one, but I guess letting people know who you are and how you are.
Oh, wow. Where do I start? Real briefly, my PhD is in philosophy, and I teach in religious studies department. So I'm technically the resident expert of philosophy of religion, and I didn't originally plan to be in academia. I thought I was going to be a minister when I was growing up, and I kind of saw the dark underbelly of church politics and left working in the church. That was right after my undergraduate. And then in grad school, when I decided to pursue philosophy, that was the first time I ever had an educator that was African American, was in grad school. Wow. And that says a lot about my upbringing. At both private Christian schools and in public schools, I never had, encounters with people of color. I grew up in Indiana, and the African American man was George Yancey, who used to teach at Duquesne, and he's a well-known philosopher of race, and that really changed my life, and it really forced me to start doing the work of unlearning any of the racist practices that have been habituated in me due to the fact that I have to come to terms with the fact that I've had a white supremacist education, that I'm part of a field. I mean, I have a PhD in philosophy, which is basically the most white supremacist field in academia. The canon is all dead white male Europeans. And 80% of philosophers in America are white men, right? So for me, I see my personal work of unlearning racist habits as deeply intertwined with my academic work, and how I try to create spaces of rest for my students who are people of color, and to challenge my white students on thinking about the legacy of white supremacy.
I appreciate that, Brock. I appreciate your vulnerability and your transparency, because it's one thing to speak one-on-one, but to kind of open yourself up to people who are engaging in conversation with you. But you mentioned a key piece in education that I think we miss, and just in being a human, as you grow, many things you have to unlearn, and that's a painful process, but it's doable when you have when you have somebody beside you saying, the more you're emptying, the more space you give to be filled with something, and it's going to be scary, but it's going to be beneficial to you. And that just it's a great transition, because after knowing Sherdina for a while, I see she does that work, really getting, not just in student affairs, but within the community, of just kind of getting into the messy places and helping people, both who look like her and who don't, both who have been doing this work for a while and who are brand new to it, from a staff standpoint and a student standpoint, really learn some new things. And Sherdina, you being a native of Pittsburgh, I guess, we can tell where Pittsburgh has its hands on you. But if you can share, I guess, where you've had your hands on Pittsburgh from your journey, coming to where you're at now, and where are you at now? How are you, I guess, processing a lot of the stuff that's going on, not just from your background as a Black woman, but from your faith background, from the different backgrounds of being a native Pittsburgher? I guess, how are you processing?
Yeah, so I started probably third grade when they started to move folks out of the community, going to different schools outside of your community. So I ended up in Squirrel Hill. I was a rambunctious kid, and so some white teachers didn't necessarily know how to deal with those type of you know, my kids with my behavior. I came in not necessarily understanding because the way people taught was so much different than what I had been learning prior to. And so I found myself kind of being acting out behavior-wise, right? And so I think that was my first, unknowing though, I was just like, Miss So-and-so just don't like me. I don't know why, she just don't like me. She's mean to me. I think, but in that, I grew up in Squirrel Hill and then went to Rogers, and I never knew racism, right? I never, other than that, I mean, I knew something was wrong, but I didn't identify that as racism. And even through, I often share, even through high school, my best friends were the Van Landingham twins, 2 white girls. Those were the only people my mom would allow me to spend the night over their house, and vice versa. Their mom was my mom was their mom, and we were best friends. And then I went to Duquesne, and my eyes were open. And I was devastated because I think that I was one of those Black people until I went to college that said, this stuff doesn't happen.
Sure.
This is not real. This stuff is not real. And so when I got to Duquesne and my eyes were open, got involved in their BSU and did a lot of work with that, and have been on that road ever since. Never thought that I would be at Pitt doing this. I too was on the road to being a pastor, you know, but you know, God takes us through different journeys for different reasons. And so, you know, now I love doing what I do. I love when I see students, you know, who come in looking, you know, strangely and like, what are you talking about? And then the light goes off. And I love seeing that happen. I love, you know, there's no money in the world you could pay me for that experience. You know what I mean? Like, it is just a phenomenal thing. And I love because, I just finished a session with some college students just now. And the fact that like, they're so, you can't, you know, my main objective first is to teach. I'm not going to assume that you're prejudiced. I'm not going to assume that you're racist. I'm going to teach you. I'm going to teach you different because I understand that we all may not have come through a multicultural environment, right? And so I enjoy what I do. So that's how I came to be where I am now. I am, you know, I often talk about this place of where I have these blinders on like that horse. And so there's some days where I have to put the blinders on. There's some days where I can't watch the news. There's some days when I don't want to, you know, because my job right now is to help my students work through this, right? And so I can't come to the Zoom or to the table really broken. So then there's some days where I just have to just stay where I am. There's some days I wake up crying, just keeping it 100. There's some days when, you know, my brother is in law enforcement. I'm so concerned about him, you know, he also jogs, you know what I'm saying? There's so many things. And so, you know, as a woman of faith, I know what changes things, and that's prayer. And so I have asked God to not, you said it the other day, I think, Emiola, in one of our, like, to not harden my heart, like not make me angry and start to say all cops are this or all white people are this, you know? And I've just had to ask God to continue to massage my heart, that my motives will always be pure, and my motives will always be censored and defined and focused through Him. And then that's the way this love thing can be, you know, can be brought forth.
Wow. Dina, I appreciate that, and you dropped a few gems, just in regard with how you engage and how you process. But you said something very, very just tangible that hit me when you said how you engage students, and you love to see that light go off. You know what I mean? You love to see like, hey, you know, I don't care how you came in, but I'm gonna keep pushing. I'm gonna keep teaching because I know a light can go off in you. And Zeus, when we met, I've seen you. I told you how your name like preceded you. Nah, man, this brother put like he pushes and he challenges, but you can really see his love for students. And you deal with student athletes, and many times they're an outlier on a college campus because their whole life is focused on sports, and many times they may not feel appreciated, they may not feel welcome. And I've seen, just with coming to Pittsburgh, to be very honest, and we've spoken about this, how Pittsburgh has a very polar binary, it's white and black, you know what I mean? And we may leave people as outliers who may not fall in that tradition. I guess if you can share a little bit about your journey, not just coming to Pittsburgh and seeing its binary reality, but also engaging students that may feel like outliers and may, truth be told, not feel appreciated, you know, not simply for the performance that they do, but for the person that they are, especially when real life situations are going on, because you approach them not just from a faith. I've seen you approach them not just from a faith perspective, but it's driven from a human perspective of love. And that's like very hard cement to kind of crack through after 20 years of, you know, living life. And then this guy comes in talking about, no, I'm gonna get to you. You're not just good at what you do, it's the person. So I guess that's a loaded question, but you can tell a little bit about your journey, because you live in a special place where you engage people.
So I grew up, I'm a West Coast kid. I grew up in Arizona, born in Phoenix metro area, born to an immigrant woman, raised by her. She was a single parent. My grandfather was my father figure. So from the get-go, my life was very nuanced and complex. And that's kind of a theme throughout this whole process of how do I hold this complexity in my life. And so in terms of a racial conversation, man, that hit me off. I mean, I remember early on in elementary, I spoke very broken English. And so I remember being taunted because of that, and kind of having this complexity of going back to visit family in Mexico and then coming back to the United States, and having this tension of not feeling Mexican enough to my Mexican family and not feeling American enough to my American friends. And so like I wrestle with, how do I hold my face in the midst of this tension, and where does my identity lie? And so that was a narrative that kind of unfolded through high school. And when I got to high school, that's when I came to faith in Jesus Christ, and that's where my identity lies in now. But it certainly became more complex in that as I learned theology and kind of that nuance, like, you know, wrestle with really like the cancel culture, right? Like Jonathan Edwards wrote some brilliant things on theology, but yet he was a slave owner. So how do you hold that? So really just having this, again, this theme, this narrative, how do you walk in complexity, and how do you hold that, right? And so now, as you said, my job with students is not to mold their minds to match mine, but to help them find their own identity, find their own story. I think it's very important for ourselves to be able to name our story and share our story. I think it's powerful. And so that's where I really get energized about the student athletes, is helping them find their own narratives and put words to their story, because I think it's a powerful platform that they have. And I do that with my own children, who are very ethnically diverse. We've adopted, we're foster parents, and so our house is very diverse. And so even having that conversation indoors. So kind of an encompassing answer to your question. But
No, that's Zeus. I appreciate that, because I've been trying to find a way to kind of articulate what I'm going through. And when you say like walking in complexity, dealing with that, because, you know, you may not be so much this to be accepted here. You may not be so much this to be accepted here. And just, you know, I was talking to one of my Black colleagues earlier today of just, you know, being in a land where you're like, no, I'm from here, but I know this land doesn't really accept me so much. And even talking to one of my white colleagues and saying, you know, like, I don't know how to deal with this complexity. I've become, as Sherdina said, the light has went off, but now I really feel bad, because it's like I've been hitting the snooze button for a good portion of my life. So how do I help you? How do I engage? Am I being moved by guilt, or is this actual transformation? And Brock, as you work in academia, which is just a very heady space, and as you mentioned before, you know, a lot of your grown up has been sectioned off with just a various homogeneous background. So I guess, how are you? Because personally speaking, I've seen you make major strides, not just from your departmental side of getting stuff out there for your colleagues, who are white to understand, but not for, also from a faith background as well. So I guess, how are you wrestling with that type of complexity? Because I see you going forward and doing major strides, but I also see hear another name, and you're like, this is crazy. How do I get other people engaged? So I guess from a personal side, how are you walking out this complexity? Because I know that's been on your heart for a while, since you have been in this work, but you still know the identities you hold as well.
Yeah, I think that comment about complexity is really, really important. And two things come to my mind. It's not both and, it's either or. There's a really great article about Ibram X. Kendi going around right now about how education's not going to fix it, love's not going to fix it. We have to change the systems and the structures. And I agree with that, but you also have to educate people to understand what systems and structures are and how that's different than individual acts of racism, right? So education's not a panacea, but there is an educational component there that is in order to help students, help me have the right tools to know how to situate myself and know how to address the situation. So both and, right? I think that's a really important component, right? As an educator, I do need to be challenged to remember just educating my students. Reading a book isn't enough, but as an educator, it's also my role to educate people, right? And then the complexity, going to kind of the way Zeus talked about, right? I don't see it as cancel culture to point out that David Hume and John Locke and Immanuel Kant and G.W.F. Hegel and all these philosophers were white supremacists. I see that as unlearning the revisionist history that has only pointed out all of their achievements and has just kind of swept under the rug all these aspects of their thinking, right? So let's just look at one of them, right? So Immanuel Kant, he believed that morality was based on your capacity for reason. And then Kant thought that Africans were incapable of reason. So he thought that they were not human and not capable of morality, right? So this is actually not just a side issue, but it's actually critical to his entire project, right? About what he thinks being a human is. And what reason can accomplish. So that doesn't mean we stop reading Kant, but our reading of Kant has to be informed by the totality of his worldview and the situation in which he lived. And so that's really what I want to help students achieve as they wrestle with that. And I'm, as an existentialist, I can't give you the perfect answer. Like, you have to continue to live in the complexity. Like, we might not have a perfect answer, and we just have to keep living with that.
Wow. I appreciate you bringing in Kant, because he's an example of a worldview that shapes who people are. And I remember talking to a friend earlier this week, and she mentioned, the move to defund police. And she said how much, negative feedback she's gotten. And she was like, people can't understand when so much power is being given on one side. What is an institution above critique? And I'm not saying for or against it, but the whole idea of just analyzing not just the work that we push up from a person or from an institution, but also looking at what things aren't so nice. You know what I mean? Even within a worldview, even within a faith, you know what I mean? What is not just what looks good, but what doesn't look good. And I think you made such a great point of that challenge of living in that complexity that's hard for people to do. And Sherdina, I know you live in that work of basically that tug of war, where people don't want to let go of things that are foundational in them. And just with the recent deaths that we've mentioned, but You know, they can go back to Rodney King, and this can go back to Emmett Till. This can go back to not just Black people, but people of color, and just seeing how fixed it is in our nation, not just from a faith perspective, but I guess how are you interpreting justice right now as you see it, not just from the slow process of police getting arrested, but, you know, you mentioned you have a close family member who's a policeman. Like, how is your interpretation of justice and or injustice right now with your many identities? Because it's a tough place to be, but I know that's where you live.
Mm-hmm. You know, I think personally, I come from the perspective of changing the heart. You know, injustice is so embedded in our country, and it is so systemic that it's embedded. Like, and you know, and so with something so deeply rooted, the only way is to try to help people see that this is a human issue and not necessarily a political or systemic, if you will, issue. This is our inability to treat each other like human beings. And so, you know, and I come from the perspective of whether you agree, disagree, whatever, at the end of the day, we all have red blood going through our vein, and we're human. And so my perspective has always been like, I love to challenge based on not sexual identity, not religious perspective, not, you know, political perspective, but as a human being, how should you treat that person? As a human being, how does it work? Like, forget about what you were raised, how you were raised, but how should you be treated? You know, and I had a student just now in this last session, and she said, we talk about pronouns and the importance of people using pronouns, and she said, well, I don't feel no kind of way about it. And I said, what if someone came to you, she was a Black student, and she had hair, and said something about your hair, you know, and wanted to touch your hair and said, oh, that's just ridiculous. How would you feel? Oh, she got irate, right? Oh, no. I said, but how do you think the person that may be in this Zoom call feels when you said so flippantly you didn't care about pronouns, which is a part of their identity? Boom, the light went off, right? And so it's like changing the heart. It's like, you know, and I told the students today, you can't put yourself in my shoes. And I didn't even talk about as a Black woman. I talked about a woman who's big. You'll never know what it means to sit on an airplane and be kind of nervous about, you know, people being comfortable around you. You'll never know that unless you become my size. And so it's trying to help people understand that, like, there's injustices that go on everywhere, you know, but right now, this thing with our brothers and sisters of color, like, I'm very appreciative that the sheet has been taken off, and that it's no coincidence that we're all home. Everybody is home in quarantine. You couldn't say that George was resisting, running, committed a crime. There's no way in the world that, you know, you could justify what happened to him, any of them, but specifically this one. And we're all home and we watched it, right? And so now I think everybody's eyes are really open to the injustices of specifically police brutality. So yeah.
Dina, you made a great point of just, you know, working in your sphere of influence. And your sphere of influence is very individual, it's very one-on-one, it's very heart-to-heart and person-to-person, you know, rather than somebody who may be at a political level where they can change systems. You just made a great point of, you know what, I see it as a heart change. I'm going to go after that root from a person-to-person level to help people understand, you know, what does it mean to treat people as humans, and just changing a perspective. And Zeus, knowing a lot of institutions have a lot of Black students, a lot of students of color who are student athletes, you know, it's tough to engage them, you know, to say, hey, you need to keep going while everything is going around them. It's hard for them to maybe see themselves as appreciated when the world doesn't see them as appreciated or even worthy. Or many times we're having a conversation of, do Black lives even matter? You know, and to me that that statement the fact that it's up for debate and conversation is like, we're just talking about matter. You know what I mean? That's this is a hard light to flick on. I guess how are you engaging and interpreting justice and injustice, not just for yourself in Pittsburgh, but to the students who you cater to, who may be of color, who may be Black, but to the ones who may be white, who may be not of color, trying to help switch on lights and switch off lights so students may not harden their hearts, to the world, while other students like, no, I need you to open it up to it. So I guess how are you interpreting justice and injustice from that perspective?
That's a great question. So I kind of to stick with this whole idea of like sharing our own stories. The more you are able to articulate your narrative, your shared experiences, what it does is it elevates your level of self-awareness, right? And so as a leader, I can't lead students past where I haven't been myself. And so that is my launch off point is if I haven't had an experience and I own it, like I am sorry you experienced that. I can't walk in those shoes, or as you tell the people today, step in my shoes, but I can empathize you on a human level, right? And so that I would say that's my angle as to how to engage these ideas, these concepts, and really speak life into students. Man, like you are worthy, you hold value, and help them understand that, because it is hard, especially as a student athlete when you're bombarded with your schedule. For all intents and purposes, their identity is tied into their wins and losses, right? And so even kind of unpacking that, like what is your identity, your ethnic identity mean for you as a student body, or as a student in the larger student body at Pitt? And so, the conversation goes a lot of ways, but kind of engaging there now is my approach.
And I know that's going like a fish upstream. You know what I mean? Because you may just receive a lot of resistance, but when I tip my hat, because that's a road that's not too traveled too often by educators and people who want to pour into other people in dense situations. And I love your perspective and your approach of even sharing stuff that's going on with yourself. I remember a colleague of mine actually called me this week, and we were talking, and he's like, I want to understand what is it like to be Black, and I was like, well, how much time do you have? I'm not sure how much I can divulge and stuff, but like, I may have been seen as the comfortable Black guy, but you see me in a suit and a dress shirt. You haven't seen me in Tim's and a hoodie, and you don't really know some of those. Like I tell you about, oh, your doctor and all that, but I didn't tell you about like when I got pulled over by the cops and they said there was a warrant out for my arrest and there were drugs and guns in my car, and then came back after 30 minutes and said, we're joking with you. Don't get in trouble, and toss me my ID back, and 4 cop car, like those type of situations were the norm. And his mouth was like, oh, this is for real. And it's like, yeah, my doctor didn't mean anything. My faith at that time didn't mean anything to them. Yeah, it meant something to me, but it didn't mean anything to them. And when I shared that experience, it's kind of like, oh, this happens to somebody I'm close to, that I know. It's not, George Floyd all the way over there. It's not a Breonna Taylor I don't know. It's somebody that I do know. And I guess, Brock, I want to ask you, how are you, I guess, engaging with people who want to do something? You know what I mean? Because the next step, when I spoke to people saying like, oh, justice and injustice that's happening to our Black African-American brothers and sisters, that's happening to people of color in this country of various worldviews, I want to do something. And my response to that was, I think you need to like sit on it first. I don't want you to like have a check mark. I need you to sit on it first. And I've gotten a lot of resistance on that because, people like to do stuff. I guess from your perspective, because you academia is a very mental warfare. You know what I mean? It's you're throwing shots and you don't even know, but you're engaging people in a way where you have to climb over a lot of landmines and walls. So I guess, how are you engaging people with what they should do now, or even if they should do something?
Ooh, man. I really like your point about sitting and resting, especially knowing that there's a long history of a white savior complex. Doing something is often, I think, a way for white people to give themselves a pat on the back and feel like and basically it's a way of recentering the whole conversation around white people all over again, or it can be. So I think it's really important to think about, to take a moment to think about, why, what are my motives for going out there and doing something? Is it just try to ameliorate this kind of white guilt that I have, or whatever it might be. And I think it's also important to create space for people to grieve, right? So one of the first things I did during the week of George Floyd's killing, Gabby Yearwood, who's in anthropology, he and I held a Zoom meeting for just some of our former Black students, our African American students, and we just tried to create some space of rest. So it wasn't about like, what are we going to go do now, or what book do you need to read? Although I've done some work with regard to that too. And I just wanted to hear students like, what's your desolation right now? What's your consolation, if you have any? If you don't, that's okay, because our society is not really good with the language of lament. We don't have very many spaces where we have where grief is considered appropriate. And even in those spaces, you go to a funeral and it's called a celebration, right? So we need spaces for lament and grief and anger. And so I think starting with that was really important. And I do think learning is still important. And so one of the things I've done is I created a very lengthy list of resources. Almost all are African American scholars. It's on the Religious Studies website about the history of the Black Church, history of white supremacy and the construction of race by white Christians, and anti-racism. And so part of that goal was to amplify Black voices in that. And that, again, that's about listening, right? So for me, it's about putting myself under the leadership of Black voices. So, and when I go out to protests, listening to Black people and not viewing that that space as my space to colonize again, but learning from them about how I should be involved in that practice.
That's huge, Brock. I appreciate you for providing those list of resources on the Religious Studies Department website. And you mentioned just that listening point of not just doing it, at a protest, but doing it within your own department, within your own authentic life. And to me, that's huge because it calls for humility, which is something that's hard for everybody to do. It's a fruit that does not want to come out. But it's needed. And for me, even with the office, when we talk about interfaith, we all talk about my message is building bridges so relationships can develop, because it's much easier for me to share and receive when I know you. And Sherdina, that's something I know that you do well, is establish and sustain relationships. But one thing I've seen just with the relationships you have and the relationship we have is it's not just cultivated in within that love is a place for correction. Because I think many times people say, well, I think your definition of love is like to make you feel good. When James Baldwin said, like, if I love you, I have to tell you about things you're not aware of. And many people will push that back, saying, what, I thought we were good faith friends. I thought we were good Christian friends. I thought I have a Black friend. I have somebody who's smart. Why does your love look this way? So I guess what piece of advice that comes from your own life of making and sustaining relationships with people who look like you, who don't look like you, who believe the same thing you do. And one thing you do well is making relationships for people who don't believe the same thing you do, but I still see those relationships thrive to the point where they'll say, hey, Dina, I feel this type of way. And you'll let them know X, Y, and Z. And they're like, it's a hard truth, but I receive it because it's coming from you, because we have that equity. So I guess what advice would you give to those who saying they may think they may have friends, but if those friends, if that relationship has no space for truth, then is it really a relationship? I guess, what advice would you give just from your own work that you do?
Sure. So I'm a member of a sorority, Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, and we have fortitude. It's a statue, and she kind of stands with one arm out and one arm back. And I remember when our centennial, and I went to Howard University and I looked at the statue, I got this revelation about how she was standing in terms of like relationships, in terms of, like as she's reaching up, she's having people who I aspire to be, right? People who are like, I just want to gain this wisdom, or I just want to gain these skills from this person. So somebody that I really look up to. And then the body would be my road dogs, people that I could just be relax and be myself with, right? And then the back, she's reaching back to help somebody else, to pull somebody up. And so my way is I need the person to do this. I need to aspire. That helps me grow. That helps me continue. But I can't hang around people all like this because I'll start to feel less than, right? And then I need these people because I just need a place to rest. I just need a place where I can just be me. But these people tell me when my stuff stinks. These people tell me when I need to get it together. You know what I mean? And these people hold me accountable, right? And then but I can't really stay here too much either because I'll become comfortable, right? And then I got the people that this hand is reaching out to, the ones that I'm pulling up. And I got to continue to educate, to empower, to enhance their lives in whatever way that I can. But guess what? I can't stay there too long either because I'll become their God. And I'll become and feel like, hey, I got it all together and look at what I'm doing. So it's important to keep all three communities, if you will, around you to kind of keep you balanced, right? Because, I do believe I still got to grow. I still got so much to learn. I still have to move forward. I still got a place that I need to rest. And I do need to be able to help others. So, that's the bit of advice that I would have, is to keep all of those different people around you at all times. And you definitely have to have somebody that you could be naked in front of. I definitely have somebody that I can just be like, look, I had a rough day and I need a drink. And then that person say, no, you don't, let's go to the movies. You know what I mean? And I have to have that because that's important for my growth and my mental stability.
Wow. It's just the different communities and different people who serve in different manners. But you touched on something that, I think Zeus brought up, of just being able to be transparent with somebody and say, this is where I'm at physically, this is where I'm at mentally, this is where I'm at emotionally, this is where I'm at spiritually. I'm venting this to you. I hope to receive wisdom back that I know will come from love, but it's going to contain some truth. And Zeus, I know you do this for your students. I guess, who in your context, who does this for you? How are you creating space for yourself to sustain? Because many times as professionals, we're catering for students. And as Brock mentioned, our job is to educate. And even for me, I get lost in work, emails, I have to do this, I have to do this stuff. And it's like, I don't want to I don't want to go down with the Titanic. I don't want to get lost in everything that's going on in the world that seems to be falling, and not take care of myself in the layers that I know matter to me, which is spiritually, emotionally, mentally, physically. And as Sherdina mentioned, she does this. She has somebody who does this for herself as a professional and just as a person who sits between a rock and a hard place in terms of the work you do. how are you
Yeah.
finding ways, or do you have a community that really uplifts you with those type of waters that you need? And I guess what advice would you give to those who are saying, you know what, I'm a loner here, or I feel I don't have close friends, or I'm an introvert, or like this is not, I can't be naked in front of anybody.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I'm a very introverted individual, and so my wife has helped me push me out of my shell and learn to value community. And as I've done that, man, I've seen so much fruit and health come from that. And so I have a group of guys that we text and call just to check up on each other. My pastor has been my mentor, and so just even running things through him has helped kind of stabilize my mental health in the midst of such crises that we've seen. And so for somebody who's maybe feeling like they don't have community, I mean, I would say like you have 4 people on this Zoom call that you could reach out to on campus. And if you feel like, man, you want somebody else, no, we could definitely refer you to people we know, at least 10 people, each of us, that we could refer to help you out. And so there is no lack of community that we can help build around you. And I'd say it's very important to seek that and to find that. Yeah, and I would say lastly, I think what's important for me in the context of injustice and race, sorry about that, for me personally was to learn to name my own biases, right, and to my own prejudice, to be able to have open dialogue and transparency. And so that was very difficult for me to kind of have that introspection of, man, what are the areas that I need to allow God to search my heart and reveal that are hindering the message of the gospel. And so learning to lament like the Old Testament prophets, and learning to call out racism like the Apostle Paul did with Peter. And so, again, all that is heavy work. And if you don't have that community around you, man, it's easy to grow contempt towards the other person. And so, again, holding that complexity is being able to have that community where you can speak it without allowing it to grow as contempt within your heart.
I can make a whole diamond mine with the type of gems you just dropped. And one thing that I want to push before we finish, that Zeus uttered and mentioned, is the need for community. And I know this quarantine has sometimes emphasized our desire to be cloistered, and to connect with people on a superficial level. But in regards to whatever faith community you do involve yourself with and you do identify with, whether it's different philosophical communities, spiritual backgrounds, community is very important. Having people that you can be, as Dina mentioned, naked and transparent with, that you can receive honest feedback. And as Zeus mentioned, be very introspective with yourself, where you can call stuff out. And maybe you may need somebody to help you along that path. You have us on this line because we mean what we say and we say what we mean, but you have people on campus. There are people around you that can help. And I just think that's really, really important that you mention, because a lot of work needs to be done at a system level, also needs to be done at an individual levels and within our own sphere of influence. So Zeus, I just appreciate you for dropping that gem. And before we finish, I'm going to ask y'all just with one word that you can give to describe what you see, where you're at and where you want to go. One word to describe where you're at and where you believe you're headed, from your faith background, ethnic, nationality, etc. We'll get to this message and this question, and then we'll finish. So I guess, Dina, I'll start with you. One word to say where are you at, and where are you headed?
Pressing.
Pressing. Pressing is where you're at?
Mm-hmm. Where I'm going is the promised land.
You try to get started. All right. You try to get started. Brock, I guess what one word of where you're at, and then one word where you're going, where you headed.
Pressing was good. The first one that came to my mind was becoming. Just recognizing that this is a process, and which also helps with being empathetic toward the people that you think, oh, why can't they just get it? Because like, took me a while to get where I'm at too. So becoming, and where I'm headed, I mean, that's a place of uncertainty. I mean, I don't know where I'm going to wind up at the end of it, right? We don't know how we're going to get there entirely either.
Uncertainty and man, if y'all didn't watch that Michelle Obama documentary on Netflix, you know, that get me right there. But Zeus, one word, I guess, where are you at and where are you headed?
Yeah, I think at the moment, the word would be patient. And as I engage people in the spectrum of racial competency, I just remind myself that cultural competency is a journey, not an event. And so just learning to be patient with people. And where I'm going, I love Dina's answer. You know, I hold on to Revelation 7, right? That people of all nations, tribes, and tongues will be gathered as a multitude. And so just a beautiful picture of what is to come.
Wow. Just that idea of just real unity and not uniformity, where people can actually be themselves. And we'll finish it off with this question. A student asked, on the top of creating spaces for students, how well do you think the university has risen to this challenge, especially during this time of social distancing? If anybody wants to share a couple words, that's a deep question, but I guess how well do you think the university has risen to the challenge, especially during this time? Anybody who wants to share
I can only
something?
speak to the student athletes, but I know that the coaches have individually done a great job of facilitating Zoom conferences with their students when they're on their teams, to have a process to check in how they're doing emotionally. And so I know that my crew we've done that as well with the students that we meet with one-on-one and our big group on Tuesday nights. So for the student athletes, there's definitely been a healthy, consistent follow-up.
Thank you, Zeus. Dina,
Yeah, I would agree. I think that, you know, within student affairs, you know, as Emiola can attest to, we've been spending a lot of times in our personal units, but then as the Division of Student Affairs, really taking time out to figure this all out, because it's a first for all of us. It's something that none of us have encountered before, and trying to figure out what is going to be our new norm. And I personally appreciate a lot of the steps that the university has taken to, number one, make our students safe and make me safe as a staff member. And I'm not trust and believe that if I didn't believe that, I wouldn't say it. Like, that's not who I am. But and so I do appreciate that. And I know that there are going to be mistakes because we've just not traveled this road before. But I know the intentions are well.
I appreciate that. Brock, do you have any, I guess, comments from your perspective?
I think professors are, trying to navigate this and figure out what it looks like to create space, both regarding coronavirus and this issue of race and racism. The reality is a lot of them, we're trying to figure out Canvas and Zoom and just the tools, as much as trying to figure out how to create those spaces. So there's a big learning curve there. But what I would really hope to see, I know in little pockets these types of creating space is happening, but on the big picture, it can often feel like what's happening is just a bunch of statements are being made, right? We're just getting a lot of emails and every department's making some kind of statement. But I think, and so hopefully students are experiencing in those smaller pockets and in the departments interaction beyond just the statements that are being made.
Wow, I think that's a great way to finish it off with just pushing all of those who are watching to be somebody who doesn't make non-performative statements, non-performative gestures, but you mean what you say and you say what you mean. So to the work of introspection, to the work of dismantling racism, to the work of dismantling xenophobia, homophobia, to the work of establishing relationships with people and not impressionships, to the work of actually building unity and not uniformity, to the work of clinging and creating community within your own faith background and learning about people across other faith backgrounds, to the work of engaging and learning how to be human again. With that being said, we thank y'all for tuning in, to Zeus, to Sherdina, to Brock. I extend my gratitude, not just for you taking time out of your professional life, but out of your personal life, and just being vulnerable and transparent and being yourself, honestly, because y'all know I'm gonna be myself, because I'm gonna get some food right after this. To those who are watching, to Stephen, Sharon, Ashley, Graham, I appreciate University Events and Special Ceremonies for making this possible. As always, catch us next week, Tuesday, 3 p.m. as we continue this conversation. We may tweak it a little bit, so you have to tune in to make sure you know how we're coming. But with that being said, if you want to go fast, go far. If you want to go fast, go alone. But if you want to go far, go together. Stephen is going to switch to a slide right now. If you want to get in touch with me, and if you want to get in touch with our guests, feel free to contact me and we will make that happen. You can see my contact on this slide, as well as our office website and email. With that being said, y'all have a great rest of the day. Enjoy the day and continue to not just go together, but grow together.